A secret on the verge of collapse. The plane landed as if the world was holding its breath. Outside, Los Angeles shone golden and alive. Inside, Harley held the faded photograph of her daughter, smiling in the kitchen, holding her grandchildren, and believed this was just a surprise visit. 3 years without seeing her. 3 years of longing, silence, and guilt that he tried to push under the rug of routine. But that afternoon, the rug would be pulled out from under them, because as he crossed the city dreaming of hugs, her house was empty. The dead garden, the clogged mailboxes, toys fallen like skeletons of an extinct joy, and, far away, in the unbearable brightness of the ocean, her husband raised a glass of champagne on a yacht rented with Harley's money. Within an hour, the man she loved would be in ruins. But before that, Harley would have to walk through the cruelest corridor of her life and discover that the daughter he had sworn to protect was dying in silence. And what he did next forever changed the fate of everyone in that story. The surprise that turned into a nightmare. The plane was descending slowly over Los Angeles, cutting through clouds golden with sunset, when Harley Sims gripped the armrests of his seat tightly. The speakers blared, announcing the approaching landing, but he barely heard it. His calloused fingers trembled on his phone screen as he typed the message he'd rehearsed throughout the flight. Landing in 20 minutes. The best surprise ever. He pressed send and put the phone away with a sigh that sounded more like a stifled sob. She was going to see her daughter. 3 years since their last hug. 3 years since their last meal together. 3 years since life fell apart with the death of Martha. Wife, best friend, the center of everything. Her absence had turned their Texas home into a graveyard of silence. In the inside pocket of his jacket, Harley carried a crumpled portrait. Matilda laughing in the kitchen, flour in her hair, Emma missing her front teeth with a huge grin, and Jack still in diapers, proud of a scribbled drawing. He'd spent the last 1,000 days looking at that photograph every morning, as if holding a piece of his own soul. But on that flight, for the first time in years, he felt something other than grief. Hope. The flight attendant's voice interrupted his thoughts. Passengers, we have begun our descent to Los Angeles International Airport. Harley took a deep breath. The surprise would be perfect. Matilda had always loved surprises. As a child, she would run through the halls screaming with joy whenever he came home early from work. Now he wanted to recreate that feeling. To arrive unexpectedly, ring the doorbell and watch her run to the door, laughing, her eyes welling with emotion. As the city loomed above the clouds, he thought back to the last few phone calls they'd had. There hadn't been many. Matilda always seemed rushed, tired, hanging up in a hurry. 3 months ago, she'd said something that had haunted him ever since. I'm just tired, Dad. Really tired. He'd interpreted it as the exhaustion of a mother of 2 young children, compounded by work and life in Los Angeles. But that phrase kept reverberating in his mind like an alarm too low to ignore and too loud to forget. As he disembarked, the smiles of others reuniting surrounded him like knives. Couples hugging, grandparents crying, children screaming with joy. Harley walked alone, his carry-on bag creaking behind him. Each step echoed the fear of having waited too long to make up for the years of distance. He called an Uber. The driver, a thin man with a Guatemalan accent, smiled in the rearview mirror as he explained the reason for his trip. Surprise for my daughter. She has no idea I'm coming. Oh, they love that. Family is everything, sir. Harley just smiled back, swallowing the lump in her throat. Los Angeles looked exactly as he remembered. Wide streets, swaying palm trees, expensive cars gliding like silent sharks. So different from the small Texas town where he'd raised Matilda, with its gravel streets and the constant smell of Martha's freshly baked bread. Matilda had always wanted more. Bigger lights, bigger dreams. And he'd always encouraged her to pursue it, even when it meant seeing her leave. During the drive, he tried calling her twice. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he canceled before it rang. Better to see her smile in person, he murmured. The surprise needed to be complete. The house appeared like a painting as the Uber rounded the corner. A white facade with blue windows and a small front yard, exactly as he remembered from video calls. Harley paid the driver in cash, thanked him, and stood on the sidewalk. the afternoon sun burning his shoulders and hope burning even deeper in his chest. He climbed the porch steps and stopped at the door. He set down his suitcase and pulled a small, polished wooden box from his pocket. He'd made it himself in the makeshift garage workshop, with hands that had once built steel bridges. It was to hold his grandmother's ring until Emma was old enough to wear it. Martha would have loved the idea. The doorbell seemed to be waiting for him. Harley closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, trying to contain the flood of memories. His 8-year-old daughter running into his arms, the smell of freshly baked cookies, Martha's laughter in the background. He pressed the button, ding-dong, silence. He waited. He smiled to himself, imagining Matilda wiping her hands on her apron and running to the door. He pressed again for a longer time. Silence. A heavy silence which seemed to come from inside the house and from inside him. Matilda? It's the father. He tapped lightly on the wood. Nothing. The smile faded. Harley took 2 steps back and looked around, as if her daughter might appear from behind a bush, laughing at her own prank. But the garden did not laugh. The rose bushes were burnt at the tips. The ground was parched and cracked. The petals that had fallen along the path looked like old confetti from a forgotten party. The lawn, once so well manicured, now grew uneven, jagged, and wild. A shiver ran down the back of her neck. Matilda loved that garden. She sent photos of the flowers every year, proud of each new bud. He walked around the house. In the backyard, the patio furniture was covered in a fine layer of dust. The vegetable garden had become a field of hollow stems, and a tricycle lay on its side, its wheels still spinning slowly in the wind, as if a child had disappeared mid-play. Back out front, he noticed the bulging mailbox. Envelopes and flyers spilled onto the sidewalk. He knelt down and picked up the top ones. 3-week-old bills, mail made out to Gary. A crumpled package postmarked 10 days ago. 10 days. Matilda didn't go 10 days without posting a single photo of the children. A cold shadow crept across Harley's chest. He rested his hands on his knees and remained motionless for a few seconds, trying to reason. An engineer's mindset. If the system seems broken, look for the logical signs of failure. He got up, went to the window and pressed his face against the glass. Dark. The curtains were drawn. No TV on, no toys scattered on the floor. But he recognized familiar shapes in the darkness. Matilda's painting easel in the corner, Jack's toy cars lined up on the coffee table, immobile objects in a house that used to throb with life. "Excuse me. Are you looking for the McCoys?" A frail voice made him turn. It was the neighbor, a lady wearing a straw hat and gardening gloves. She was carrying rusty scissors and a wary expression. "I'm Matilda's father. How long has it been since you saw them?" She thought, wrinkling her face. "Now that you mention it, it's been pretty quiet. I usually hear the kids playing, but it's been days, no movement at all." Harley nodded in thanks and sat back down on the porch step, the wooden box clutched tightly in her hands. It felt like she was standing in front of an abandoned movie set, everything set up but no actors. He pulled out his phone, opened Matilda's profile. Last post 6 weeks ago, a photo of Emma's school project. Before that, a 2-month gap of silence. Matilda, the woman who even posted Sunday pancakes. Harley's stomach churned. The sun was setting and lengthening twisted shadows across the sidewalk when he finally took a deep breath and said to himself, "Time to stop guessing." He pressed the call button once, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Same thing. On the 3rd try, he decided to leave a message. But before he could speak, the line clicked and a professional male voice answered. "Hello? Dr. Rivera, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center." "Doctor? This is Matilda's father. Why do you have her cell phone? Where is my daughter?" There was a silence that lasted an eternity. Then the words that shattered Harley's world. "Sir, your daughter is in the ICU. She has advanced stage cancer. Her condition is critical." The world went white. No sound, no form. Just that word, critical. His legs gave way. His cell phone almost fell out of his hand. Cancer. Matilda was dying, and he was sitting on the porch of an empty house, holding a gift he might never deliver. When consciousness returned like a cold blade, he heard the doctor asking him to go to the hospital immediately. Harley barely remembered getting up. shuffling to the street and raising his arm to hail a cab. He only remembered the address that now burned like fire in his mind. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, 8700 Beverly Boulevard, UTI de Oncologia. He got into the car like an automaton. The door slammed shut, seeming to seal his old life outside. As Los Angeles traffic snarled around them, Harley stared at the crumpled family portrait she'd pulled from her pocket. Matilda laughing, Emma smiling toothlessly, Jack with his drawing, the vivid memory colliding with the reality of approaching death. And for the first time, amid the pain, another sensation arose, hot, metallic, dangerous anger, not hers, but who wasn't with her now. From someone who promised to love her, honor her and care for her. Where was Gary? Why hadn't he called? Why had he left his wife to waste away alone, to the point where her own father had to find out from a stranger on the phone? The taxi screeched to a halt at a traffic light. Harley clutched the portrait so tightly that the edges tore. Outside, the world remained mundane. People laughing in cafes, cyclists passing by, children playing. While his daughter struggled to breathe, Harley looked up at the orange-tinted sky and thought of Martha. If she were alive, she would have felt it. Mothers feel it. She would have forced Matilda to tell her. She would have come running. She would have held her daughter's hand during her first chemotherapy session, and maybe the pain would have been lessened for that alone. But Martha was dead, and he, a man cowering in pain for 5 years, had failed to notice the signs. Now there was only one certainty. You won't die alone, not while I'm breathing. As the taxi plunged down the traffic-clogged avenue, Harley stared at the glass and steel horizon with a look that was no longer one of mourning. It was one of war, but what he would discover in the ICU would be even crueler. Gary wasn't just absent, he was partying. Room 712. The glass facade of Cedars-Sinai loomed ahead like a modern city wall, glistening in the last golden rays of sunlight. Harley stepped out of the taxi, legs shaking, her head pounding. Each step to the automatic door seemed longer than the 1,000 miles she'd flown that morning. The doors opened with a whisper, and he was swallowed by the cold silence of the lobby. The air smelled of alcohol and anxiety. People hurried past, nurses pushing stretchers, relatives whispering with red eyes, doctors typing endlessly on glowing tablets. Everything seemed to operate at an invisible, impersonal pace like a vast, indifferent organism. He, on the other hand, felt broken into pieces. "Excuse me," the voice was hoarse. "Oncology, intensive care unit." Matilda McCoy, the soft-faced receptionist with square glasses, looked up, typed something, and asked for an ID. Harley's hands were shaking so badly, he nearly dropped his wallet on the counter. She stuck a visitor sticker on the front of his coat and pointed. 7th floor, East Wing. Elevator at the end of the hall. The elevator seemed to take forever. Each number flashing on the panel sounded like a bell tolling at a funeral. 4, 5. Go finally. 7. The doors opened onto a white overlit hallway where the air was colder, more sterile, and heavier. He followed the signs to the oncology ICU as he advanced. The sounds changed. The hubbub of the lobby was left behind, replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines, the squeak of rubber shoes, and the whispered sound of voices that feared to disturb the prowling death. At the nurse's station, a short man with thin glasses stood up when he saw him. "Mr. Sims, I'm Dr. Rivera. I'm glad you could make it. How is she?" The words escaped like a whisper, hoarse. "Stable for now, but very weak. The chemotherapy didn't work as expected, so we're trying another protocol. She's tired, but lucid. She asked for you." Harley nodded, unable to speak. "Room 712, brace yourself." Illness takes a visible toll. The doctor led him down a silent corridor lined with rooms with half-open doors. In each, fragments of tragedy. An old man holding the hand of a paper-thin woman. A young mother reading to a bald child. A young man staring alone at the ceiling as if counting the seconds until he disappears. Was at the end of the hall, isolated. When the doctor opened the door, Harley thought her heart would stop. Matilda was unrecognizable. Her skin, once flushed and vibrant, was now translucent, with bluish veins tracing fragile maps beneath the surface. Her emaciated face made her eyes enormous, two clear, feverish lakes framed by sparse lashes. Her hair, the same brown hair Martha called a spiral of sunshine, was thin, pulled back in a loose bun, revealing her pale scalp. She looked small in the large bed, her shoulders sunk into high pillows, her arms covered in purple marks and tiny holes, connected to clear tubes that carried silent liquids to bags suspended on metal supports. Monitors around her flickered green and blue, like small, cold fires. But when she saw him, she smiled. A fragile, crooked smile, but unmistakably hers. "Dad," came out in a whisper, but it hit him like a locomotive. In 3 steps, he was beside her, careful as if she were made of glass. He sat down, took her cold hand in both of his, and lowered his head. "My God, daughter. Why didn't you tell me?" She closed her eyes, the smile still hanging on her face. "You were still mourning Mom. I thought you'd get better soon. I didn't want to worry you." Harley's throat burned. "How long have you been alone in this?" She hesitated, her voice barely passing through her dry lips. "Since February, the symptoms got worse. Then came the tests, the treatments. The doctor said 6 months, maybe 8, but I'm still here." Harley swallowed, blinking hard to clear away the blur of tears. 6 months. Maybe 8. She was fighting death while he organized his tools in the garage and thought she was just busy. He sat in the chair beside the bed and spent long minutes just watching her chest rise and fall unevenly, listening to the monitor beep with each heartbeat as a reminder that she was still there. When she fell asleep for a moment, he got up and went to the window. From the 7th-floor balcony, Los Angeles glowed in miniature, indifferent. Cars streaked the avenues like fireflies. The world went on, as if his daughter's struggle meant nothing to anyone but the two of them. He turned and looked at the table beside the bed. There, among crumpled tissues and water bottles, lay her cell phone, plugged into the charger. The screen lit up at the touch, revealing a wallpaper of the 2 children, Emma and Jack, embracing in the garden. Harley felt her chest tighten. Where were the kids? Then where was Gary? Returning to his chair, he waited for Matilda to wake up again. When her eyes opened, he forced his voice to sound light. "What about Gary? I haven't seen you post anything about him lately." Her expression faltered for a moment. "He said he had important meetings this week. He should be back this weekend. When was the last time you were here?" 3 days ago. 3 days. Harley fought the urge to clench his fists. His wife was on the brink of death, and Gary was in meetings. Anger throbbed, hot and dull. Matilda, as if sensing it, looked away to the window. "He says this all scares him, that he doesn't know how to deal with it." Harley took a deep breath to keep from exploding. "And the children?" "Neighbor Emma takes care of them during the day. Gary takes care of the bills, the practical things." She said this as if trying to convince herself. Harley was silent. He knew what that meant. He wasn't caring. For an hour, he stayed by her side, telling light stories, reminiscing about her childhood, making her smile when he could. She would fall asleep for minutes, then wake and search for him with her eyes, as if afraid he would disappear if she blinked. Each time she said, "Dad," he would answer, "I'm here," and hold her hand tighter. When he finally fell into a deeper sleep, his chest rising at a slightly calmer pace, Harley rose silently. He walked to the door and closed it carefully behind him. Breathing for the first time in hours, the hallway seemed quieter than before, as if the world held its breath along with him. He leaned against the cold wall and pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. He needed to talk to Gary. He needed to understand why that man wasn't there. He called. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Then he looked back at the bedroom door. Soft light reflected off the glass, and behind it, his daughter slept alone. On the table beside the bed, her cell phone was still charging. Harley returned, went back inside, and carefully picked up her phone, as if it were fragile. She opened the list of recent calls. The last connection she'd received from Gary was 2 days ago. 2 days. 2 days without even knowing if his wife was still alive. Nausea rose in her throat. Harley pressed call on her cell phone. Ring, 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 voicemail. He was about to put the phone back down when the screen lit up with a notification. Instagram. Gary's new story. Harley stood still for a moment. Then with a trembling thumb, she touched the icon. The image loaded, and for a moment the world stopped. a white deck gleaming in the sun, champagne glasses sparkling like liquid gold, an endless blue sea in the distance. Gary was on a yacht. The time in the corner of the screen said hour ago. The air seemed to drain from the room. Harley stared at the image as if it were a flagrant crime. And in a way, it was. While her daughter languished alone in a bed surrounded by machines, her husband was celebrating. He swiped to the next story. Gary was smiling next to two tanned men in sunglasses, all three raising glasses. The caption read, "Living the best life with the boys." Harley gritted her teeth until her jaw ached. Next story, Gary diving off the deck, laughing, then reclining on white cushions, an expensive cigarette in his hand. His feet propped up lazily. In the last one, he himself said, "Nothing like a few days away from reality to clear your head, far from reality." While Matilda struggled to breathe, Gary cleared his head with champagne and someone else's money. Because Harley knew, Gary's business consultant salary didn't buy yachts. A spark of calculation lit in his mind. He remembered, a year earlier, Gary had requested emergency access to a reserve account Harley maintained. He said it was to spare Matilda financial stress, that the house needed repairs, that Emma needed dental work, that he simply wanted to protect the family. Harley, driven by the desire to believe his son-in-law had some semblance of decency, had authorized it. Now, watching Gary toast over the Pacific while his daughter was intubated, he knew. I knew where the money came from. He knew who was paying for Gary's cowardly escape. Himself. Harley carefully put her phone back. The room was dark, only the beeping of the monitors punctuating the silence. She approached the bed and looked at her daughter's sleeping face, so fragile and so brave at the same time. "I'll fix everything, my love," he whispered. "You won't suffer alone anymore. I promise." As he spoke, hatred settled in his chest like lead, cold and heavy. It wasn't a hot, impulsive hatred, but a meticulous one, the kind an engineer feels when faced with a structural flaw. You don't yell at it. You fix it precisely. Yell at it. You fix it precisely. And Gary was about to find out what happens when you build a life of lies on the money and trust of a man who built steel bridges with his own two hands. Harley left the room silently. Her expression hardened into stone. The corridor seemed to shrink around him. He didn't know it yet. But every glass Gary had raised on that yacht had been bought with Harley's money. And now Harley was going to cut off the trader's oxygen. The red circle. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever as Harley left room 712. Each footstep echoed as if he were walking through the interior of a hollow machine. The smooth white walls reflected his distorted image. A man hunched over, his shoulders heavy as anchors. He stopped at the window at the end of the hallway. The city glittered below, filled with headlights and neon signs. Los Angeles seemed to never sleep. But inside that hospital, time was different, slower, crueler. Each second carried the weight of uncertainty about whether Matilda would be alive the next. Anger throbbed beneath his skin. It wasn't a chaotic fire. It was cold, methodical, like steel cooling in water. Gary was on a yacht, with glasses of champagne and laughter gilded by the sunset. While Matilda was breathing on a ventilator, Gary celebrated his own escape, and worse, with Harley's money. At first it seemed impossible. But the memory came back sharply, like a needle piercing the fog of pain a year ago. Gary knocked on the door of his makeshift workshop in Texas, the smell of varnish and fresh wood still in the air. "Harley, we need to talk." "It's about money." Harley remembered every detail well, the measured tone of voice, the look of false concern. Gary had said Matilda was stressed about finances, that the house needed renovations, that Emma's dental work was expensive. He'd asked Harley to give him temporary access to the reserve account he'd kept since his days as a senior engineer. An emergency fund even Matilda hadn't known existed. Just until things settled down, he had promised. "I don't want Matilda to have any more worries." Harley, blinded by his desire to believe his son-in-law was a decent man, had accepted. He signed the papers. Adding Gary as an authorized user, he thought he was helping. Now, looking at the image in that story, Gary diving into a turquoise sea, the sun glinting off the waves like blades. He realized he'd been fooled with a smile and sweet words. Gary was not an overburdened man. He was a well-fed parasite. Harley returned to the waiting room and sat in a stiff faux leather chair. Her mind raced, but her fingers were steady. He grabbed his phone, opened the bank app, and entered his credentials with surgical precision. The passwords were old, memorized like prayers, the fruit of 40 years of watching every penny with almost military discipline. The screen flashed and loaded the reserve account. Statement, the numbers came like Ponches Punto, Marina del Rey, Yacht Charters, was $15,000. Nobu Malibu, 850 Beverly Hills Mercedes. Service, U2D $400 Rodeo Drive Boutique. U3D $200. Soho House, U1700 the list went on. Shopping, dinners, hotels, and most importantly, a standard. As Matilda's medical expenses mounted, Gary's spending exploded. During the first chemotherapy sessions, he was in expensive restaurants. When she lost her hair, he bought her designer clothes. While she vomited silently in the bathroom, he rented yachts. Harley ran his hand over his face, feeling the cold sweat and throbbing skin. Every dollar Gary spent tasted like blood. The waiting room was empty. A digital clock flashed 10:14 p.m. in red. In the corner, a TV played a muted talk show, its colored lights dancing across the polished floor. Harley opened the bank authorizations tab. There it was, Gary McCoy, authorized user since April 2022, 2 years of access. 2 years of sucking the family's financial lifeblood while pretending to care for them. Harley's hand trembled. Not from hesitation, but from restraint. There was a voice inside him, calm and glacial, that took control. Don't blow up. Plan. He pulled a small, black-covered notebook from his pocket, the same one he used to record measurements when he worked on bridges. He began recording dates, amounts, and locations, a meticulous dossier of Gary's corruption. Each line was a nail in his son-in-law's coffin. As I wrote, memories crept in like ghosts. Matilda at 6, running around the workshop with a tape measure longer than she was, saying she wanted to build castles. Matilda at 12, proudly displaying the first painting she made. Matilda at 19, embarking for Los Angeles with her eyes full of stars. He'd raised her to dream big, and she had. But she'd chosen Gary as her flying partner, and he'd clipped her wings. No more. Harley finished the list and tucked the notebook into the inside pocket of his coat. He rose slowly, every muscle rigid with controlled tension, and walked back down the quiet hallway. When he opened the door to 712, the room was plunged into a bluish twilight. Matilda slept soundly, her features softened by sleep and exhaustion. The monitor blinked rhythmically like a little beacon saying, "Still here, still here, still here." Harley approached and stood there for long minutes just looking. The anger receded a little, replaced by desperate love. He lightly touched her hair, now short and fragile like silk threads, and whispered, "You will live. I will make sure of that." She stirred, her lips parting in a murmur. "Okay. I'm here, my love. Sleep, I'll take care of everything." Her eyes closed again. Harley stood there, motionless, like a guardian on the edge of the world collapsing. In the early hours of the morning, the hospital fell into almost absolute silence. Harley left the room and went to an alcove next to the chapel, where there was a small table with power outlets. She plugged in the laptop she'd brought in her carry-on bag and began working. With each click, the plan solidified. He accessed the full account reports, downloaded invoices, and cross-referenced dates with Matilda's hospitalization records, which he had discreetly requested from Dr. Rivera. The lines overlapped obscenely. First chemo session, Gary spent bound $200 on a boutique hotel. Second hospitalization for fever, Gary bought a $4,500 watch. Matilda's hemorrhagic crisis, Gary paid for a weekend in Palm Springs. Each piece of evidence was more cruel than the last. And then came the worst part, the cash withdrawals. Small, but constant. Daily, like a slow, deliberate hemorrhage. Harley felt nausea rise but held it back. In its place, something denser took over. Decision. At 3:12 in the morning, he closed his laptop and stared at his own reflection in the window. The eyes that stared back at him were Not those of a defeated old man. They were those of a man who had spent his entire life solving impossible problems with logic and precision, and who now faced the most personal of all. Gary thought he could drain Matilda's life and Harley's money with impunity, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated a father's love. Harley smiled, a cold, joyless smile. Then he put away his laptop, turned off the light, and walked back to room 7 on 12. Matilda was fast asleep, and the sight of her gave him something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Tomorrow, Gary would wake up and find that the spring had dried up, and that would be just the beginning. Harley sat in the chair beside her daughter's bed and sat there, motionless, her eyes fixed on the darkness, her mind turning like steel gears. With each beep on the monitor, an idea fit into the plan. With each weak sigh from Matilda, a new reinforcement of her decision. When the clock struck 5 a.m., and the sun began to streak the Los Angeles skyline with gold, Harley was still there, property, silent, dangerous. Gary didn't know it yet. But in the next few hours, Harley would cut off every penny that kept him afloat, and then destroy what was left. The bill. The Los Angeles sun was rising, filtered through frosted glass when Harley opened her eyes. She had slept, if it could be called sleep, for less than an hour in the hard chair beside her daughter's bed. Her neck was stiff, her mouth dry, her eyes burning, but her mind was sharper than any day in the last 5 years. Room 712 remained plunged into a cold, blue silence. Matilda slept soundly, her lips parted, her bony fingers on the sheet. With each faint rise of her chest, the monitors responded with a timid beep, like a heartbeat in Morse code. Harley watched her for long minutes, until she felt the anger rise again through her body, warming her bones like an engine coming to life. Anger was good. Anger kept him awake. Gary was feasting on the ashes of the woman he had sworn to protect, and using Harley's money to pay for every sip of champagne. Today, this would end. At 6 a.m., he rose with calculated movements, like a construction worker who knows every inch of the structure he's about to demolish. He left a quick note on the bedside table. "I'll be back soon. I'm here," and slipped out of the room silently like a determined ghost. The hospital was still asleep. The corridors were empty, the air heavy, the cold lights flickering at long intervals. The feeling of being alone in a city of concrete and steel seemed fitting. This was how he'd felt since Martha died, surrounded by people but alone. He crossed the lobby, ignoring the sleepy glances of 2 security guards, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The street was still damp from the night's mist, and the sky was turning gold behind the buildings. Los Angeles was slowly waking up, oblivious to the war he was about to declare. He found a newly opened corner cafe. The chairs were still stacked, the aroma of freshly ground beans filling the air. He ordered a black coffee and chose a table in the corner, facing the wall. He needed silence. He needed focus. He opened the notebook. The screen lit up, cold and white, and Harley's eyes became scalpels. He accessed the bank. His hands didn't shake. Each click was as precise as a structural calculation. Reserve account. Current balance was $127,438,077, the same account he'd created 20 years ago, when he received his first big bonus as chief engineer of a suspension bridge in Colorado. He'd saved that money for family emergencies, surgeries, catastrophes, his grandchildren's future, never to bank yachts for cowards. Gary appeared there as authorized user since April 2022. Harley clicked on the name, opening the complete list of movements linked to his access, and then he saw the entire map of the silent loot. Daily withdrawals of $200, $300, $500 one-off, purchases of $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, each line a slow bleed, each date coinciding with some dark milestone in Matilda's illness. While she was having biopsies, Gary had dinner at Nobu. While she was losing her hair, Gary was shopping for clothes on Rodeo Drive. While she passed out in the bathroom, Gary rented a yacht. Nausea hit like a punch, but Harley swallowed hard. There was no room for disgust, only for precision. He took the small black notebook out of his pocket and began to write. Dates, values, locations, authorization numbers, Transaction eyed one line after another, with the firm handwriting of someone who spent his life recording calculations that supported tons of steel. As I wrote, memories came flooding back like shards of glass. Matilda at 7 years old, wearing a yellow helmet, visiting a construction site with him, and asking if bridges were also afraid of falling. No, he replied at the time, because there are engineers who won't let you. Now she was the bridge, and he would be the engineer who would stop her from falling. The coffee grew cold, forgotten on the table. The morning wore on, the sounds of the city growing louder outside. Horns, engines, hurried footsteps. But inside Harley, the world was utterly silent, like a war laboratory where every gesture had to be precise. When he finished collecting data, he took a deep breath and clicked the button that said 24 emergency support. The call was answered on the third ring. First National Emergency Services, this is Amanda. Who am I speaking to? Harley Sims, I need to immediately revoke an authorized user's access to my backup account. Her voice took on a more formal tone. May I verify your social security number and voice password, sir? Harley recited the information with military clarity. Thank you. I see a user named Gary McCoy here, who has been authorized since April 2022. Would you like to revoke his access entirely, immediately and permanently? This will also cancel linked cards and automatic payments. Cancel everything. Every card. Every debit. Every service. The silence on the line lasted only 3 seconds, but it sounded like a sentence being written. Processing now. One moment, sir. Harley stood still, her fist clenched on the table, as the hold music sounded like a distant hum. Then her voice came back. Completed. The reserve account balance will be transferred to your primary account. Gary McCoy has been removed as an authorized user. 3 cards in his name have been canceled. Any attempts to use them will be declined. Harley closed his eyes. A muscle in his jaw twitched, then relaxed. Send fraud alerts if he tries to log in again. Already activated, sir. You will receive email confirmation shortly. Thank you. Amanda. He hung up. The silence after the call felt almost sacred. Harley closed his laptop, put the notebook in his pocket, and finally took a sip of the cold coffee. A bitter, metallic, and strangely satisfying taste. Gary was still on the yacht, still laughing, still raising cups bought with money that wasn't his. But now, the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. In the next few minutes, cards would start to be declined, the accounts blocked. The automatic doors to Gary's luxurious world would close like traps, and he had no idea who had pulled the lever. Harley stepped out of the cafe onto the sun-drenched sidewalk. Morning traffic roared down the avenues, buses belching smoke, bicycles weaving between cars. Everything seemed intensely alive, chaotic, vibrant, and completely oblivious to the fact that a man was about to sink. As I walked back to the hospital, a cold, meticulous thought took hold. That was just the first phase, financial amputation. He still needed to plan phase 2, the destruction of reputation, and phase 3, legal protection of Matilda and the children, so that Gary would never come near them again. But first, I wanted to see with my own eyes the exact moment Gary realized the house of cards had collapsed. By the time he reached the 7th floor, the hospital was already bustling. Nurses were changing shifts. Doctors were rushing with tablets. Patients were being wheeled in for tests. The world was starting to move again, but Harley was still on a different frequency. Slower, more lethal. Entered room 712. Matilda was awake, sitting up with effort, her thin shoulders propped up on pillows. Her eyes lit up at the sight of him. Dad. I thought you left. He smiled, feigning lightness. Never again. He sat down and held her hand. Still cold as porcelain, they talked quietly about Emma, Jack, Texas, anything that didn't involve the word cancer. But inside, Harley was counting down. The cell phone vibrated in his pocket. An email. Subject, access revocation confirmation. Gary McCoy, he didn't open it. He didn't need to. Another email arrived seconds later. Transaction declined. Card ending 7632. Location, Marina del Rey Yacht Charters. Harley suppressed a smile. The first stone had fallen. Minutes later, as Matilda took a weak sip of water, Her cell phone, on the table next to her, began to vibrate. Harley looked at the display. Gary. His heart beat once, heavy and steady. Then he leaned over and whispered to Matilda, "I'm going to get some coffee. I'll be right back." She smiled sleepily and closed her eyes. Harley grabbed her cell phone and left the room, letting the door close softly behind her. He walked to the end of the hallway, where a window looked out onto a skyline of buildings golden in the sun. The cell phone vibrated again. "Gary," he answered. "Harley, what the hell did you do? My cards were declined in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was?" Gary's voice was choked, furious, terrified. In the background, Harley heard the ocean, raised voices, hurried footsteps. The yacht was falling apart in real time. Harley was silent for a second, letting the tension simmer. Then he spoke softly, with a tone so sharp that the air itself seemed to recede. It wasn't awkwardness. "Gary, it was just the beginning." Gary gasped on the other end of the line. You can't do this. I have rights. I'm her husband." "You era her husband," Harley said, each word dripping with steel. "Now he's just a thief with a frozen account. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Pressure is watching your daughter die while the man who promised to take care of her rents yachts with your money." The silence that followed was dense, electric. Harley could almost hear the sound of Gary's gears grinding. "If you don't restore my access now, I'm filing for divorce and keeping the kids." That sentence cut through Harley like a blade. For an instant he saw Emma and Jack, small, innocent, being dragged back into the arms of the man who had abandoned their mother to die alone. When he spoke again, his voice was pure ice. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." And he hung up. He stood still for a moment, staring at his reflection in the glass. The man staring back at him had the eyes of a patient predator. The bill was paid. Now the settlement would come. Gary didn't know it yet, but Harley was already preparing the next move, the one that would destroy his reputation in front of the entire world. Denied cards. The sun was already rising high when Gary realized something was wrong. At first, he thought it was a system error. He lay on the yacht's deck, expensive sunglasses hiding his champagne bleary eyes, while the DJ played a lazy beat and the sea lapped rhythmically against the hull. A group of business friends, really investors he was trying to impress, drank and laughed around him, convinced that Gary was the kind of man who could spend $15,000 on a Tuesday just to relax. The illusion lasted until the moment the marina manager came aboard with a tablet in his hand and a tense smile. "Mr. McCoy, we need you to confirm payment for the second rent period." Gary raised his glass like a bored king and handed over one of the metal cards. The manager swiped it. The machine beeped. Transaction declined. "Try again," Gary ordered with a frozen smile. Refused. Laughter began to die away all around, like light bulbs going out one by one. The manager frowned. "If you prefer, you can try another card." Gary took another. It passed. Refused. A deafening silence spread across the deck. Even the DJ turned down the volume. Someone coughed. Another chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Gary felt his face heat up, sweat breaking out beneath the open collar of his linen shirt. He tried another card. Refused. The manager cleared his throat, visibly embarrassed. "Sir, we'll need you to settle the payment before we can continue the service." Gary heard one of the investors whisper something to the other, stifling a laugh. The ground began to crack beneath his feet. Not the polished wooden deck, but the world he'd built on bluffs and stolen money. Meanwhile, in room 712 at Cedars-Sinai, Harley watched the sun stream through the sheer curtains, painting golden streaks across Matilda's pale face. She slept soundly. Every breath was a gift. Harley's cell phone vibrated. An email. Subject: Transaction declined, Marina del Rey Yacht Charters. Card ending 7632. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He just put his cell phone back in his pocket, his eyes fixed on his daughter's fragile chest rising and falling under the blanket. The plan was working, and it was still just beginning. On the yacht, Gary tried to maintain his composure. "It must be a problem with the bank," he said, forcing a laugh that came out too thin. It always happens with high-limit cards. But the eyes of the men around him were no longer laughing. One of them, the one with the white blazer and the shark-like grin, raised his eyebrows. High limit? Then try Pix. Gary typed on his phone, his fingers damp with sweat. The banking app froze for a second, then displayed access denied. Account not found. His mouth went dry. He tried again. Access denied. The manager cleared his throat. Sir, if payment isn't made, we'll have to terminate the charter immediately. The vessel will be towed. Gary looked around and saw the looks, some amused, some cold. The same men who had been fawning over him hours before now backed away a few inches, as if he were infected. The DJ turned off the sound. The sea remained calm. But inside Gary, the world was collapsing. Harley quietly left his daughter's room and walked down the hallway to the hospital lobby. He ordered a coffee from the ground floor cafeteria and sat alone near the window. The phone vibrated again. Another email. Transaction declined. Beverly Hills Mercedes and card ending 8811. Then another Rodeo Drive Boutique, card ending 99922. Gary was desperately trying to keep up the facade and failing. In public, Harley closed her eyes for a moment, tasting the bitterness of cold coffee and the sweetness of revenge mixed together. For decades, he had spent his life designing structures capable of withstanding earthquakes. Now, I was watching a collapse. Gary tried to reason with the marina manager, his voice rising an octave. Listen, I've been a customer for years. I've always paid on time. Our system shows insufficient funds, sir. Impossible. There must be some connection error, a temporary block. All your cards have been declined. None are active. Investors began to reach for their cell phones, disguising their rush to hail private cars back to the mainland. The one in the white blazer smirked. It happens to the best of us, Gary. Or maybe the worst of us. Gary took a step forward. But the manager held up his hand. If there is no payment, we will call the Coast Guard to forcibly remove the group. The faces around were now masks of scorn. Gary realized, with a new dread, that he was no longer part of them. It had become a spectacle. At the hospital, Harley received another notification. Withdrawal attempt, Pacific Coast Highway ATM, declined. He knew what that meant. Gary, cornered, was trying to get cash to save face. Harley looked at her reflection in the lobby glass and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Control. Pure. Absolute. Like at the height of his career when every calculation he made kept steel bridges standing. Now he was demolishing a man with the same precision. On the yacht, chaos broke out once and for all. 2 marina security guards came aboard, politely asking the guests to leave the vessel. The investors left one by one, chuckling softly, shaking their heads. The one in the white blazer walked past Gary and said in a low voice, "I always knew you were just a veneer." Gary stood alone on the deck as footsteps echoed across the dock. The DJ was packing up his equipment. The sparkling glasses still had spills of forgotten champagne. He picked up his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Then he typed a short, desperate message. "Harley, we need to talk." At the hospital, Harley saw the message notification light up. He didn't answer. He took the last sip of coffee, threw the cup in the trash and went back up to the 7th floor. Matilda was awake now, her eyes clear but tired. She smiled when she saw him. "Did you go get coffee?" "I did." He sat up, adjusting her pillows. "Did you sleep well?" "Better. Since you've been here, I've been sleeping better." Harley held her hand, and for a moment, the world stopped spinning. The noise of machines, the weight of the hospital, everything disappeared. Only her eyes remained, and the silent promise he had made. No one would hurt her anymore. At the dock, Gary stepped off the yacht, demoted to an ordinary man. His shoes were wet, his shirt was wrinkled. His hair was stuck to his forehead with sweat and sea air. The investors disappeared. The manager ignored him. The sailors were reeling in cables, already preparing for the tow. Gary staggered down the walkway and landed on his butt on the pier's concrete sidewalk. He picked up his cell phone once more. The screen flashed. Access denied. Balance unavailable. People walked past him as if he were invisible. And for the first time, maybe it was. At the hospital, Harley's cell phone vibrated again. This time, a call. Gary Harley pressed mute and looked at Matilda. She slept again, serene, her breathing more stable. He leaned over and kissed her forehead gently. Then he left the room. Closing the door behind him, he walked to the window at the end of the hallway and stood there, watching the vibrant, distant city. He let the cell phone ring until it went to voicemail. Then finally, he typed a single message back. You chose champagne over chemotherapy. Now choose silence. It sent blocked the number. And he stood there, motionless as the sun flooded the buildings and the world resumed its routine. But inside Harley, the war was just beginning. Gary had lost the money, but he still thought he could salvage his image. Harley, however, already planned to destroy even that. The connection. The 7th floor corridor seemed like a tube of white light. Outside, Los Angeles was bustling. Inside, time moved at a cotton wool pace. Harley pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the emergency window and inhaled slowly, as if she could draw into her lungs the calm the world had owed her for years. The cell phone vibrated in the palm of his hand. Gary, he stared at the name on the screen like someone staring at an animal that has already bitten and will bite again. The ringing persisted. The sound echoed down the hallway, hit the silence patience resting sign, pierced Harley's chest and found nothing but steel. Answered. Harley? What the hell did you do? Gary's voice came in layers, panic, anger, newfound shame. In the background, the sound of the sea, raised voices, a distant whistle. The party falling apart, the pieces of the charade falling to the deck. My cards were declined. In front of everyone? It wasn't the world, Harley said, low and sharp. It was just the truth. You can't do this to me. I'm her husband. You era, he corrected. The echo returned the word like a verdict. Now he's just a man who chose champagne over chemotherapy. Gary inhaled through his nose loudly, like a bull about to charge. Listen, old man, you think you're in charge? I'm filing for divorce today. I ask for custody of the children and use my daughter's pain as a bargaining chip. Harley didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words carried the weight of a lead bar. Try, silence. On the other side, the sea pounded stubbornly against the hull. Harley saw the scene without being there. Gary in a wrinkled shirt, hair plastered with sweat, the DJ gathering cables, his friends avoiding eye contact. A king without a kingdom. You don't understand the pressure, Gary choked. The doctors, the bills, the bills you paid with my money at Nobu on Rodeo Drive in Marina del Rey. Harley thumbed open the black-covered notebook. He didn't even need to look. He knew it by heart. 15 grand on the yacht yesterday. $850 in the restaurant 3 days ago. 2,400 offices last week. While she vomited blood, you toasted to the best of life. Gary was speechless. In the silence, the hospital breathed with its regular beeps, life persisting despite everything. Restore my access, Harley, he said, his voice tight, or I'll sue for custody and take you both to court. I have connections. It has stories with location, transactions with timestamps, recordings of you, and an absence history when your wife was admitted to the ICU, Harley snapped. You know what a judge sees when he looks at that. It's not a father. It's a risk. The sound of the ocean faded for a moment. Maybe Gary had ducked into a bathroom on the pier. Maybe he just ran out of breath. You're not going to do this to me, he whispered. I can change. I'll come over now. We'll talk. You give me back access and you go up in the elevator. Take a picture holding her hand, post a little text about faith and family, and then head back to the yacht at the first opportunity. Harley closed her free hand. No, at least, send me enough to get me out of here. Gary's pride cracked with a dry creak. I can't afford the dock. Harley gazed at the city from a distance. He saw the sun splash laser beams on the glass facades, heard a siren in the distance, felt the weight of Martha's wedding ring in the inside pocket of his coat. He'd carried it since the wake, like someone carrying a bone from his own heart. Gary, he said, and the name came out clean as a knife. Do you know what you are? A reminder of what I wasn't when I should have been. The man who protects. On the other side, breath held. If you come within 5 meters of my daughter or my grandchildren without a court order, I won't just cut your cards. I'll cut your reputation. And then I cut off your last shortcut. The people who still pretend to respect you. You can't. I can, Harley said, and hung up. The hallway drank in the silence. A nurse passed by with a cart, nodded, and continued on. Life continued with the clinical cadence of someone who's seen it all. Harley put away the phone, took a deep breath, and returned to 712. Matilda slept on her side, her face turned toward the window. The filtered light made the IV look like a thread of liquid gold. Her fingers trembled slightly. A fine tremor, and Harley covered them with her own hand until the tremor subsided. I should have come sooner, he thought, and the thought bit. But guilt is a blunt tool. It doesn't cut anything, it only hurts the one who holds it. What he had now were sharp instruments, data, deadlines, names, routes. He picked up the notebook. He turned the page. He wrote at the top, Phase 2, image, below. In millimeter lists, compile stories plus location plus timestamp statements. With luxury expenses crossed with hospitalizations, call logs, absence plus attempts. In recording of the custody. Threat neighbor's testimony. Be careful with children. Medical record of visits or lack thereof. In the margin, a rectangle. Family lawyer. Urgent. Harley got up and walked to the nurse's station. Dr. Rivera was standing, tablet in hand, talking to a nurse with discreet eyebrows. The doctor looked up, saw his father, not the visitor, the good, and softened his expression. How is she? Harley asked. The new protocol stabilized some markers, the doctor said, the tiredness in the corners of his eyes unable to erase his sincerity. Today was a better day than yesterday. Harley nodded, swallowing a thanks that would come with interest later. I need something, doctor. Visiting records. Who signed, who didn't, check-in times. I don't want third-party medical details, just cold stamps. Dr. Rivera studied him for a second. He saw the precision of someone who spends his life signing reports that support tons of paperwork. He also saw the pain of someone who held a daughter's hand and felt the chill in his bones. And he nodded. Whatever is possible by law, I will provide, he said. And, Mr. Sims, don't let her fight alone. I won't, Harley replied. In the ground floor cafeteria, he found a corner with a power outlet. He opened his laptop. The cool aluminum felt like the serenity of old rituals, warming up the machine, adjusting the brightness, aligning the pen over the notebook. Searched, wrote down, called. Almeida and Torres office, family law. Good morning. The voice on the other end was a practiced smile. I need emergency counseling. Spouse abandonment during serious illness. Risk to children. Robust digital evidence. He was sent on with the haste that money and urgency buy. 3 minutes later, he was speaking to a lawyer with a calm tone and concise sentences. What proof do you have? Stories with geolocation. Luxury expense statements in the admissions window. Records of no-shows. A recording where he threatens to seek custody as a bargaining chip. That's excellent, she said. Excellent. In legalese, meant plains, we will request protective measures. A temporary suspension of unsupervised visits, a prior block on transactions on behalf of the minor, and, if necessary, a request for temporary reverse alimony payments. He pays. Do you manage? I also want an order preventing contact at the hospital. It is possible. If we demonstrate direct emotional risk to the patient. Harley closed his eyes for a second. The word risk had always been a number to him, a curve, a graph. Now it was a face. And I want this never to come to her as a burden, he said. Only as a relief. Then let's get to work, concluded the lawyer. Send me everything by 5 p.m. We'll file it today. He hung up and, before taking a breath, wrote another list. Phase 3, protection, social worker, children's routine, care for neighbor, Emma school, formal communication about guardians and blocked contacts, pediatrician, third-party authorization, grandfather, in case of emergency bank, accounts in the name of minors, protection hospital restraining order, no unauthorized visits as fingers ran across the keyboard. Messages popped up in the corner of the screen. Transaction declined. Access denied. Withdrawal attempt blocked. Gary wasn't accepting the sinking. He flapped his hands, pounded the water. He sank anyway. Harley attached all the PDFs, screenshots, and audio files to a zipped folder. He named the file the way engineers do when they know someone will one day search for it in the archive. McCoy v. McCoy, Evidence Phase 2, ICU 712.zip, sent it to the lawyer. The relief wasn't sweet. It was functional, like unlocking a stuck pin. A piece slid into place. He climbed to the 7th floor. On the way, he passed the hospital chapel. The door was ajar. Inside, 2 old women prayed, their lips almost motionless. Harley's heart turned once toward the wooden bench, but he didn't enter. This wasn't a day for words. This was a day for actions. He found his neighbor, Emma, the lady with the straw hat, in the hallway, holding a bag of children's clothes. "I came to bring Jack's shirts," she said. "The others, I don't know where they are." "You've been an angel," Harley replied, a tremor rising in her throat. "Can I ask you a favor? Just tell me, in short, in these past few months, who's taking care of the children most?" Emma sighed. She looked at the floor, then up at his face as if apologizing for stating the obvious. "I," he said, and Emma herself, her granddaughter, took care of her brother. Her father was hardly ever around. Harley thanked her. He asked as politely as possible for a simple signed statement. Dates, times, nothing but facts. She nodded. "For her," the neighbor said, her wrinkled eyes shining. When she entered 712, Matilda was awake but different. There was a clarity in her eyes that didn't come from the serum or the light. It was a kind of acceptance that doesn't yield, that chooses. Acceptance that doesn't yield, that chooses. "Dad," she reached for his hand, I need to tell you something about Gary." Harley sat down with measured care. He let her hand squeeze his. He waited. He changed. "After Jack," she said, her voice low, swallowing the shame that should never have been hers. "He started saying I was a burden, that the money was disappearing, that I should do more. And when the diagnosis came, he blacked out." Harley breathed into her pain like someone breathing into a deep dive. "I thought I was protecting you," Matilda continued, "by not telling you. You'd already lost Mommy, and I thought, if I got well soon, if I didn't complain, he'd come back." "You didn't have to protect me," Harley said, not accusing, just truth. "I should have protected you." She closed her eyes, a tear escaping, small, stubborn. When she opened them, there was something else there. A thread of her own, perfectly righteous anger. "Did he call?" she asked. Harley hesitated for exactly the length of a beep. "He called," he said. "He threatened to ask for custody." Her eyes hardened, not with hatred but with instinct. "He won't," she said, the energy returning like electricity to a dry wire. "He won't." "It won't," Harley confirmed. "I already started today." She squeezed his hand tightly. In those cold fingers there was a spring of return. The cell phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Prefix of Marina Del Rey. Harley stood up slowly, signaling with her eyes that she would be right back. She left the room, closed the door gently, and answered the door in the empty hallway. "Hello." The voice on the other end was choked. But it wasn't Gary. It was a woman, young and distressed. "Mr. Sims? I was on the boat. I work with events. I thought you should know. He's saying he's coming to the hospital, that he's going to handle it personally. He's very nervous." Harley felt his entire body go quiet inside, the kind of quiet that precedes a bridge collapse or a gunshot. "Thanks for calling me," he said. Anything he posts, deletes, or says, recorded. Time, place. "If you can, send it to me." "Sure," she said. And the line ended with "a click week." Harley put away her phone, turned toward the nurse's station. "I need to speak to floor security," he said to the assistant. "Now." 2 minutes later, a security guard appeared. Tall, big hands, professional look. "My daughter is in 712, Harley began, as simply as a packing list. "Her husband is unstable. He threatened to come here and hands-on. I want immediate access to the floor restricted, and if necessary, an escort to prevent further access. If he comes, you call the police. I'm already taking care of the paperwork." The security guard heard, understood, and nodded. "We'll signal reception and triage. No one enters without identification and express authorization from the attending physician." He wrote the name Gary McCoy in a discreet box next to the screen. "If you show up, we'll contain you." Harley thanked him. He returned to the window at the end of the hallway. The city still shone insolently. Planes streaked across the blue stripe. Someone, somewhere, was landing to surprise someone they loved. And perhaps they would be greeted with flowers, cornbread, the smell of home. But for him, today there were no flowers. There were numbers, names, deadlines, doors that would open for some and remain closed for others. The phone vibrated in his pocket with a new notification. He opened it. File received short video. Gary filmed from the side, his face flushed, his voice thick with alcohol and humiliation. "I'm going there. I'm going to get those kids away from her. That old man doesn't give me any orders. You'll see." Harley didn't press play again. She forwarded the video to the lawyer with the line, "Urgent, proof of risk threat." Then she took a breath. The air came in painfully, came out heavy. But it went in. It came out. He reopened the notebook. He wrote slowly, as if steadying a beam. Phase 2, image Phase 3, protection Phase 4, consequences, and below. The sentence Martha would write if she were there, with her blue pen and her sad, wise smile. Those who choose to escape reality find justice. The phone vibrated once more. Unknown number. Again with the Marina prefix, he answered. "Mr. Sims?" The same female voice lower. In the background, quick footsteps, a ship's siren. He couldn't pay. They're taking him, but he's going anyway. He said he knows a shortcut that will get him to the hospital in less than an hour. Harley closed her eyes for a moment. And when she opened them, everything was in place. The plan, the routes, the names, the love sharp as a blade. "Thank you," he said. "You helped me keep my daughter alive." He hung up. He turned to the security post. "Contingency plan," he said. "Start now." At 7:12, Matilda coughed softly, a reminder that life doesn't wait for drama. Harley walked to the door. He pressed the handle. Before entering, he scanned the silent hallway like a general who knows the field. Everything ready? Everything in place. Then, under the cold light, the cell phone vibrated for the third time. Other unknown number, not from the Marina. The prefix belonged to a lawyer in the west of the city. Harley answered. "Mr. Sims?" The male voice came clear. "We received the protocol. A judge is reviewing the request for a protective order. Now, but I need to confirm, are you in a position to guarantee that if he shows up, there is testimony and documentation from the hospital?" Harley looked at the chalkboard labeled Gary McCoy, at the security guard with his arms crossed, at the camera on the ceiling. "I am," he said. "And we will." "Then get ready," said the lawyer. "Because when the pen strikes, the next step will no longer be yours. It will be ours." The call dropped. Harley placed her hand on the door of room 712. She felt the cool wood. Behind her, her daughter's breathing. Ahead, the breath of the cornered wolf coming toward them. He opened the door, walked in, and with the care of someone who knows exactly what holds a bridge together, sat down beside the bed. He took Matilda's hand. He smiled knowingly. And he waited. Gary was on his way to the hospital. In less than an hour, the 7th floor hallway would no longer be silent. And when the door to 712 opened, Justice would walk in with it. The corridor. The digital clock in the 7th floor hallway read 3:04 p.m. when Harley opened her eyes again. He hadn't realized he'd fallen asleep. He'd only blinked. Sitting in the chair beside Matilda, his fingers still intertwined with hers. Her daughter was breathing more regularly, a soft wheeze, her chest rising with effort, but without visible pain. The chemotherapy seemed to have eased for now. Harley released her hand carefully, like putting a fragile jewel back in a case, and stood. Outside the window, Los Angeles glittered in the afternoon sun. Planes streaked the sky in white lines. People made plans, bought flowers, complained about the traffic. None of them knew that, at that very moment, a broken and dangerous man was driving furiously down the Pacific Coast Highway. Coming to settle things personally, Gary Harley walked to the nurse's station. The security guard, a tall, stern-faced man identified by his badge as Ramirez, was holding a cup of coffee and watching the security screen on the counter, where several cameras displayed the hospital's entrances. "Updates?" Harley asked quietly. "Gate staff notified," Ramirez replied. If he tries to go upstairs, he will be detained, but... He paused. Collapsed men do unpredictable things. Harley nodded. He knew this better than anyone. He had spent years designing structures to withstand earthquakes and understood perfectly. The greatest danger wasn't the impact itself. It was the secondary collapse, when what was above collapsed onto what was still trying to stay standing. Gary was in a state of collapse, and Matilda was right below him. At 3:27 p.m., Harley's cell phone vibrated. Message from the young woman who worked on the yacht. He left the marina. Driving alone. He said he was going to settle the score. He's out of control. Harley thanked him with a single word. Understood. Then he blocked her number, not out of coldness. But to close that part of the story, Gary no longer had a yacht. I had no more allies. Now, he would no longer have access to his daughter. He returned to 712. Matilda was awake, her eyes brighter than they had been that morning. When she saw him, she smiled weakly. "You look strange," she said, frowning. "Concerned," Harley replied bluntly. "Gary's coming." Her smile faded like a candle in the wind. "What? Here? Why?" "Because you lost everything and you need someone to blame." She closed her eyes for a moment, and tears came anyway. "I don't want to see him." "You won't." Harley's voice was firm, a steel beam piercing the air. "I promise." Matilda nodded with a tiny movement. Harley kissed her forehead, straightened the sheet, and left before she could see the trembling in his hands. The corridor now looked different, narrower, colder. Ramirez was already standing by the elevator, talking on the radio. "The gate confirms a compatible vehicle entered the parking lot, alone. Any attempt to enter without medical clearance must be barred," Harley said. And Ramirez nodded. The tension in the air was physical, almost audible. Nurses passed quickly, averting their eyes as if sensing the pressure shift before a storm. The elevator display at the end of the corridor lit up. 1, 2, 3. Harley stood still, hands clasped tightly behind her back. "Do say 6?" Ramirez reached for his taser. "Holster 7! The elevator stopped with a..." Metallic sound and a blast of cold air escaped through the cracks. The door opened. Gary came out. Like a human storm. His suit was wrinkled. His beard was unshaven. His eyes were red and dilated. His hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and anger. His tie had disappeared at some point during his escape. His shoes were dirty with sand from the marina. He held his cell phone in one hand, trembling, and the other clenched into a fist. When he saw Harley in the middle of the hallway, he stopped. The silence fell heavily. "You," growled Gary. Harley didn't answer. He just stood there, firmly between Gary and the door to 712, like a pillar supporting everything. Ramirez stepped forward. "Mr. McCoy, you are not authorized to be on this floor. I need you to..." "Shut up," Gary snapped, never taking his eyes off Harley. "She's my wife." "My kids are with her." "I have a right." Harley then spoke in a low, restrained voice. "You had rights. Until you gave them up." Gary laughed, a short, cracking sound that sounded more like a choked sob. "You think you can erase me, old man? Cut off my money, my life, and leave me out?" "You did it yourself," Harley replied. Gary's face tightened like glass under heat. He stepped forward. Ramirez did too. The air became so dense that it seemed solid. "If you try to take one more step," Ramirez said, "I will call armed security and the police." Gary froze for a second. Then he turned back to Harley, spitting out the words, "You think you won. But she loves me. She always will. You can't rewrite that." "No," said Harley, "but I can make sure she lives to forget." The sentence fell in the air like a verdict. Gary stood still. The silence was so profound that he could hear the heart monitor in room 714 beeping at regular intervals. Then, with a sudden movement, Gary tried to move forward. Ramirez moved fast, much faster than Gary expected. In half a second, he had him against the wall. His arm twisted behind his back, and the taser pressed to his waist. "It's over," Ramirez said calmly. Gary was panting, his eyes bloodshot, his face red. He struggled for another second, then gave in, collapsing with a hollow sound like metal hitting concrete. Ramirez handcuffed him with plastic cable ties and spoke into the radio. "7th corridor. Subject restrained. Request escort. Two nurses looked through the door to the dressing room. When they saw Ramirez standing and Gary on the floor, they backed away silently. Harley stood still, motionless, his expression neutral, his eyes burning. Not from anger, from something deeper. Kind of pain that turns to stone. Gary looked up, his pride shattered. You ruined my life. Harley crouched down, kneeling before him, until they were face to face, and he said low enough for only Gary to hear, "No, I just cut out the rotten part before it contaminated the rest of the family." The escort arrived. Two uniformed security guards lifted Gary, now limp and dragging his feet. The hallway fell silent again as the elevator swallowed him, and the doors closed with a thud. Final whisper. Ramirez adjusted his belt and nodded to Harley, who responded with a brief nod. The hallway seemed wider, brighter, but not lighter. Harley stood there for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the door of 712. On the other side, Matilda was breathing, alive and free, or almost, because Harley knew Gary was not a man who would accept the end, and men like that don't disappear. They wait, creeping in the shadows of their own ruin, ready to strike again when the world relaxes. Harley wouldn't relax. Never again. He went back into the room and sat down beside the bed. Taking Matilda's hand again, she opened her sleepy eyes, and upon seeing him, she smiled weakly. "You are here," he whispered. "I always will be," said Harley, and deep in his eyes, hidden behind the tenderness, the metallic reflection of what was to come lit up. Gary was kicked out of the hospital, but not out of their lives, and as the elevator took him down, he was already planning his way back. At times, the elevator had swallowed Gary like a dark hole and returned the 7th-floor corridor to silence, but Harley knew, with the certainty of someone who has spent decades studying stress and collapse, that silence did not mean stability. Silence was just the moment between two waves, and Gary was a wave that didn't know how to back down. That night, after Ramirez reinforced the no-access sign, Harley was left alone at Matilda's bedside. She slept soundly, her breathing rhythmic to the whisper of oxygen and the steady beep of the monitor. The peace in the room was deceptive, like the gap between two cracks before a structure collapses. Harley opened the black notebook and turned the page. At the top, he wrote, "Phase 4, counterattack," below. 3 words: discredit, isolate, neutralize. The pen glided steadily, without hesitation, as if each letter were part of a bridge diagram, each stroke calculated to support tons. That was what Gary had never understood. A father's love was not an emotion. It was engineering. At 2:43 a.m., Harley's cell phone vibrated. Media notification, Gary McCoy, recent post. Harley opened it. Gary stared at the camera with his face washed, his beard shaved, his eyes red and shiny like cracked glass. Behind him, a cheap hotel room with ochre walls. The caption read, "My wife is seriously ill and I was thrown out of the hospital by my own father-in-law. They don't let me see my children. Help me tell my story. Justice for Gary. Father is family too." Harley read the comments sprouting like fungus. How cruel. She needs her husband by her side. Typical old controller. If it's true, Zoo. He closed his eyes for a moment, not out of tiredness, but to hold back the blade that wanted to come out of his throat. Gary was trying to flip the axis of history. If not contained soon, it would create a public fog of doubt that could taint even the courts. Harley started typing. Not on social media, on spreadsheets. In the morning, while Matilda sipped hospital coffee with trembling hands, Harley walked down to the ground floor cafeteria and set up his base of operations in a quiet corner. He turned on the notebook. He typed quickly, methodically first, saved Gary's post, comments, times, to data. Then, cross-referenced with the hospital attendance report, cold stamps confirming that Gary had not appeared once in the last 2 months. Next, he attached bank statements, locations of yacht stories and luxury dinners, and records of blocked withdrawal attempts. Created a file, timeline, spousal abandonment and misuse of funds. GM each event with time, place and evidence. Every future lie Gary made would have proof waiting for it like a steel trap. At 11:17, the lawyer called. The judge issued the temporary restraining order, she said, her voice firm. No approach within 200 meters of the patient or minors. And Harley. His video went a bit viral. I've seen it, he said. I'm treating it. Just be careful. Public opinion is volatile, and men like that try to save themselves with spectacle. Harley responded with a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I'm not putting on a show. I'm building a scaffolding that's going to collapse on him. That afternoon, the first journalists began to circulate. 2 reporters waited on the sidewalk outside Cedars-Sinai, speaking into cameras, microphones pointed skyward. Businessman claims he was banned from seeing his sick wife, read the caption on the lobby TV. Ramirez blocked their entrance. Harley slipped behind the columns unseen, carrying the black briefcase containing the files. In the hospital's meeting room, he met the institution's legal director, a man in a gray suit with a slow voice, and handed him the package with a signed receipt. If you try to associate the hospital's image with this individual, Harley said, you will have grounds for denial. The director leafed through the extracts, the records, the absence stamps. He looked up. It destroys him. That's the idea. As the world began to divide between those who believed Gary and those who called him a parasite, Harley took the next step, isolating him. He called Gary's old associates, the few who still responded, each connection, a scalpel. He informed about the ongoing processes, about the withdrawals of third-party money, about his absence due to his wife's terminal illness. None of them defended Gary. Some just sighed and said, we already suspected. One of them, the one in the white yacht blazer, laughed dryly. Is he still trying to look human? For a little while, Harley said and hung up. Late in the afternoon, he received a new media alert. Gary had given a live interview in a sensationalist podcast. Harley watched silently on the laptop. Gary, in a poorly ironed suit, spoke in a voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. She didn't want me to see her suffering. Her father hates me. I was overwhelmed. The presenter nodded like a complacent judge. In the comments, hearts, sad emojis, supportive phrases. But then the interviewer, looking for drama, asked, can you prove you were present? Gary froze for half a second. Then he muttered, she knows I was. Harley paused the video, printed the screen. With the timestamp, he noted next to it, hospital records, 0 visits, attach. Gary didn't understand, but his every public appearance was now a self-incrimination recorded in 4K. At 8:07 p.m., Harley received the lawyer's email, documents accepted, protective order issued, temporary custody assigned to Matilda, with you as substitute guardian. Gary barred from direct contact with minors. If violated, automatic preventive detention. Harley closed her eyes. There was no triumph, just the feeling of a beam snapping into place just before it collapsed. Another safe piece. The last one was missing. Neutralize. The next morning, Gary reappeared, not in the hospital. On national TV, a tabloid magazine article featured his black and white photo, captioned The Forgotten Husband. The article portrayed him as a victim of an authoritarian father-in-law and a system that devalues the father figure. Matilda saw the headline on her phone and started to tremble. Harley carefully took the device from her hands. He's trying to pull you back, he said. People will believe him, she whispered. Harley leaned in and looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had once darted across a wooden kitchen with colorful ribbons in her hair. Then let's show him who he really is. By late afternoon, the story had disappeared from the air. Harley had sent the complete dossier to the editorial office. Transactions, stories, medical records, the recording of Gary yelling, I'm going to get the kids away from her. The magazine published a discreet retraction. Update. Conflicting information has emerged regarding Mr. McCoy's version of events. Behind the scenes, the presenters began deleting supportive posts. Online comments turned silent, then hostile. Gary had tried to return to the surface. Harley had pulled him back to the bottom like an anchor. At 11:11 p.m., alone in the hospital guest room, Harley opened his notebook and wrote at the bottom of the page, "Neutralize. Break your last weapon. The penalty of public opinion." Below, a list, threat video evidence of embezzlement, abandonment records, testimony of the neighbor, medical reports confirming absence. When he finished, he put down his pen and just listened to the distant sound of the elevators. Gary was struggling in the dark, but he was still breathing. That was dangerous. Desperate men don't die. They explode. Harley knew he needed to end it before he decided to hurt Matilda to hurt him back. He closed the notebook slowly. The dry click of the cover sounded like the locking of a trigger. Downstairs, a night watchman was making his rounds when he saw a figure standing across the street, motionless in the shade of a tree. He wore a dark cap, hands in his pockets. His face turned toward the lit windows of the hospital. When the headlight came on, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness. The security camera recorded the moment. 11:21, 11:58 p.m. Man matching Gary McCoy's description. The notification arrived on Ramirez's cell phone at 12:02 a.m. and 30 seconds later, Harley's. He was sitting silently, staring at the ceiling of his room when he read the message. He wasn't scared, didn't move. He just stood there, breathing slowly until calm returned like cold steel. Then he took the notebook, turned to the last blank page and wrote at the top in a firm hand, Phase 5, End. Below, a single sentence, "If he knocks on the door of 712, he won't leave." Harley closed the notebook and put it in his coat, and he sat in the dark, his eyes open, waiting for the inevitable. Gary was back, and this time, "Didn't want attention, I wanted revenge. Didn't want attention, I wanted revenge." The trap. The clock in room 712 read 3:12 when Harley opened her eyes, not to a sound but to the absence of it. The entire hospital seemed suspended, as if someone had pressed pause on the world. Not even the elevators groaned, not even the carts creaked, not even the monitors complained. Matilda slept soundly, her skin more flushed, her lips moist from regular breathing. Harley watched her for long seconds, absorbing every feature, like an architect mentally recording the building he's sworn to protect. Then he stood up, silently, and went to the corner of the room. He opened the black notebook. Phase 5, End. The notes were organized like a controlled demolition project. Shortest route forecast from Marina to Cedars-Sinai, off-peak times at the hospital blind, spots of indoor cameras, positioning of night security guards, falsified medical AU. Credentials, legal sequence for arrest in flagrante delicto, without risk of judicial setback. The page looked like an engineering blueprint, because it was, but what would be torn down was not concrete. It was Gary, at 4:05 a.m. Ramirez appeared at the door, as agreed. Dark suit, discreet vest. Look of someone who has been sleeping with one eye open since 1997. He was seen prowling the block at 11:58 p.m., he said. Then he disappeared. He's studying the entrance, Harley replied. He'll try it when the shifts change and attention wanes. Ramirez nodded as if recognizing a war strategist. Do you want us to intercept you on the sidewalk? No, said Harley. I want you to come in. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. If we enter with a flagrant, it's an attempted trespassing in a hospital, Harley explained, his voice neutral and precise. If he's barred from the hospital, it's just an attempted visit. He needs to knock on the door. That's the only way to truly arrest him. No bail. Ramirez stared at him for a second and then nodded again. This time more slowly. You really are an engineer. Now I'm a father. At 5:22 a.m., the hospital began to shed its skin. The lights grew warmer. The first routine noises emerged. Nurses yawning, elevators waking up, random alarms sounding. It was the fragile hour, the moment when the night guards are exhausted and the day guards have not yet taken over. Harley knew that if Gary was going to try, it would be now. He had prepared everything. Ramirez in position at the end of the corridor, out of line of sight. Another security guard hidden behind the nursing desk. Cameras repositioned to record the attack without alerting Gary. Judicial police officer stationed in the lobby with an arrest warrant, ready. Harley sat in the chair next to Matilda, but didn't relax. His hands were firmly on his knees, his gaze fixed on the door like a beacon, waiting. At 5:49 a.m., the elevator at the end of the corridor lit up. 1, 2, 3, the yellow display flashed like an irregular heart. 4, 5. Harley leaned forward slightly, shoulders tense. The door opened, and Gary left. He was no longer a man, he was a walking ruin. His suit was wrinkled, his collar sweaty, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights and chewed-up anger. In his hands, a crumpled bouquet of cheap flowers, the paper torn and damp. But there was no tenderness in the gesture, only calculation. Harley saw Gary was coming for the final show. If you got to Matilda, you would have the picture. The cruel father would become tyrant preventing true love in the headlines. And then, as always, he would run off to the next yacht paid for with tears. Not this time. Gary walked down the hall, trying to appear calm, but his eyes betrayed his frenzy. Harley stood still. When Gary was just a few feet away, Ramirez appeared out of nowhere and blocked the path with his massive body. "Mr. McCoy, you are prohibited from approaching this patient. Court order. Take one more step closer and what? You're going to shoot a man who only wants to see his own wife?" Gary's voice echoed, high, melodramatic, perfect for non-existent cameras. "You're going to be arrested," Ramirez said without emotion. Gary ignored him. He took another step. Harley stood up. "Gary," he said, his voice low as the sound of screws being tightened. "You're 2 steps away from losing even the right to say her name." Gary looked at him, a feverish look, wet with despair and hatred. "You destroyed my life. I just took you from her," Harley replied. Gary suddenly stepped forward, throwing the bouquet on the ground and trying to push past. It all happened in seconds. Ramirez blocked him. The second security guard came out from behind the counter, and the judicial officer appeared at the end of the hallway with the warrant in hand. Gary struggled, screamed, kicked, but the plastic clamps clamped down on his wrists and ankles with sharp snaps. His scream echoed off the barren walls like the sound of metal being crushed. Matilda didn't wake up. As the officer read Gary his rights in a monotone, Harley stood a few feet away. I didn't say anything. He didn't smile. He showed no triumph, just looked. He looked like someone watching a bridge about to collapse, knowing that no one else will cross it and get hurt. As Gary was dragged down the hallway, he looked over his shoulder one last time. His eyes were red. His voice reduced to a whisper soaked in venom. "This isn't over yet." Harley didn't answer, but something in his eyes, a cold, precise spark, left Gary silent for the first time since entering the hospital. The elevator swallowed him with a hiss. The doors closed, and the corridor was empty. Ramirez approached. "End of the line," he said. "Not yet," Harley replied, looking at the door of 712. "It just changed addresses." Ramirez didn't ask what that meant. I knew Harley was talking about war, of men who refuse to fall, and that's why they need to be buried. Harley entered the room. Matilda was still sleeping soundly, her forehead slightly sweaty, her hair just beginning to grow in new strands. He straightened the sheet, sat up and gently held her hand. He stood there, motionless, until he heard the distant elevator beep signaling that Gary was leaving the building in police custody, but he didn't believe for a second that this was that Gary wouldn't give up. I wouldn't know how. Therefore, Harley had already started preparing the last phase, not just remove it, annihilate it, legally, financially, and socially, until no one could say his name without whispering failure. He would open this project tomorrow, with a new title at the top of the page. Phase 6, Extinction. But for now, it just stayed there, watching, like a human watchtower, on the edge of a field that still hid mines. The beeping of the heart monitor accompanied his breathing, steady and hypnotic. Matilda squeezed his fingers lightly in her sleep, and the gesture brought life back to Harley's chest like an engine revving again. He looked up at the door, cold, closed, silent, but not for long. Gary was handcuffed, but he was still breathing, and Harley knew an enemy is only defeated when it ceases to exist. When it ceases to exist. Extinction. The next dawn broke without wind, as if the city held its breath to watch what was to come. At Cedars-Sinai, 712 was dimly lit, the window half open, the beeping of the monitor marking a human, almost domestic rhythm. Matilda slept with the serenity of someone who, for the first time in months, sensed that someone greater than their pain was at the door. Harley, standing beside the bed, closed her coat, checked that the blanket covered her feet, and left. This wasn't an escape. This was work. In the empty elevator, he opened the black notebook. The top of the page, Phase 6, Extinction. Below, 3 columns with dry titles. Legal Fort. 2, Financial Vacuum. Social Quarantine. He ran his fingernail over the paper until he felt the grain. It was like touching the drawing of a bridge that already existed in his head. All he had to do was lift it. Legal Fortimat, 6:11 a.m. He sat down at a table in the ground floor cafeteria, turned on his laptop, and joined a video conference with the lawyer. Her face appeared square, the background white, the eyes as if she'd been working all night. "We secured the hearing to convert the protective order into a permanent order," she said. "I want to go all out. Material and emotional abandonment, attempted coercion, endangerment of minors, and a request for preliminary injunction to manage emergency finances. And the recording of the threat? It's a central piece, and the attempted break-in at the hospital, with a report from the security guard and the judicial police, puts the lid on it." Harley nodded. The blinking cursor on the screen matched the beeping sound he could still hear from memory. "We'll go further," he said. "Prior freezing of any remaining liquid assets, including equity interests, and a request for forensic analysis of his accounts. I want the entire trail." A tiny smile appeared at the corner of the lawyer's mouth. "You want to scrape it to the bone." "I want to sterilize the wound," he replied. "If a germ remains, we could lose the limb." She wrote it down. The dry sound of the key sounded like a judge's gavel. "One more thing," Harley continued. "I want the court order to explicitly mention the children's hospital and school. No contact, no messaging, no intermediaries. We did it," she said. "But you need to keep a record of any attempts he makes. Everything." Harley held the notebook up to camera level. "Dense pages, dates, arrows, attachments. I have. Financial Vacuum at 7:02 a.m., he called the bank. The same calm voice from the day before answered him with automatic deference. But now there was another layer. Recognition. The case had an internal legend. "I want to extend the freeze," Harley said. "Any financial product where he appears as an additional user. Third-party cards. Joint accounts, even if they're not listed under my CPF. I'm requesting an investigation based on suspicion of fraud and embezzlement of funds from an elderly person. I'm the elderly person." The attendant was silent for 3 seconds, the time it takes to navigate invisible protocols. "Mr. Sims, we've opened a fraud case with top priority. Do you authorize us to notify other institutions via the alert network?" "I authorize. And I want confirmation emails for each contact made." He hung up and went straight to the yacht's insurance company. Not to complain, Toflud, he sent the package with statements, schedules, proof of the payment refusal, a screenshot of the manager boarding, and a screenshot of Gary's toasting story, and copied the legal department. The email's subject line was a nail in the coffin. Customer fraud, data and evidence, subscription considered. The response came within 15 minutes. Formal thanks, a promise to review the risk profile, a warning that business partners would be informed. In short, the door closing where Gary used to enter laughing. Next target, facade consumers. Harley toured the businesses where Gary had posed, restaurants, clubs, dealerships. Each received in sterile legalese what they needed to avoid having his name linked to theirs. It wasn't loud revenge. It was a condominium meeting. The debt was collected, the incidents recorded. The neighbor who drunkenly broke the elevator was evicted. The phone vibrated with an email. Preventive profile blocking, Soho Club. Then another, suspended registration, Marina del Rey yacht charters. Other, internal list, do not receive. The vacuum wasn't metaphorical. It was administrative. Those who thrive on VIP doors die when the revolving doors jam. Social quarantine. Harley knew public opinion was a fickle thing. Gary had tried to light his with gasoline. All he had to do was turn on the sprinklers. He set up a press kit, timeline, hospital stamps, cross-referenced extracts, video of the threat, report of the attempted break-in, testimony from neighbor Emma. The children stayed with me for X days. The father was absent. The one who picked them up and took them away was Dr. Rivera's opinion on emotional stress as a risk factor. At the top, a simple note. We only ask that the truth not be edited to benefit those who have made a platform out of lies, hand-picked two serious, non-sensationalist outlets. He issued an embargo, only publish if both had the full story. It wasn't about burning Gary. It was about cutting off oxygen to the fire. Mid-morning, a reporter responded, I understand. We'll check everything with the hospital and the court. Harley, thank you. Children deserve silence. My daughter, peace. He put away his phone. He took a deep breath. The cafeteria was full of sounds, trays, silverware, hurried voices, and yet he could still hear the beep coming from the 7th floor. The body learns the rhythm of what it chooses to love more than itself. Went up. Matilda was awake, pale, but her skin was less taut. Her gaze held a new firmness, the firmness of someone who has felt the ground level beneath their feet. You disappeared, she said, smiling small. I went to work, he replied, sitting down. Today, the world is a little quieter. She stared at her father as if discovering he wasn't just the man who told bedtime stories. He was also the one who held storms by the throat and chased them out of the house. I'm scared of what's next, she confessed. Of life after the hospital. Of the noise it might make. Harley squeezed her hand slowly. Noise doesn't bring down houses, he said. Bad foundations do. And we've already replaced the beams. She laughed, a short, beautiful sound that brought Martha into the room for a second. Harley saw, in that laugh, the girl who had run across the yard in a yellow raincoat shouting that she was a thunder engineer. Rest, he urged. I'll finish outside and come back. At 1 p.m., the phone rang, attorney. We killed the audience, she said. Protection converted. 0 contact. 0 outreach. 0 indirect calls from third parties, and set freeze granted on a provisional basis. Harley let his head fall for a moment, as if leaning his forehead against the cold metal after the cut. Thank you, he said, knowing it wasn't obligatory, as one says to someone who does paid work. It was gratitude from someone who realized there are people who dare to be bridges. One more thing, she continued. A journalist called me. She asked if you wanted to talk. No, he replied. The documents speak. That's what I said. At 4 p.m., the first story series left. No adjectives, no sad music. Just facts. Absent husband tries to report abandonment. Records show absence. Court orders protection. Hospital reinforces policies. A frame from the security report. Attempted break-in contained forwarded. Comments. Few. Clean. One of them. May he seek treatment and disappear. Harley closed the flap, walked to the hallway window, and leaned his forehead against the glass. Below, a flower truck was unloading boxes. He considered buying of us. Then he imagined the cloying smell in a chemotherapy room and decided against it. The best gift he could give his daughter was silence. The cell phone vibrated with an unexpected notification. Direct message. Name unknown. I worked with Gary. He owed me money. He always seemed like someone you shouldn't mess with. Today I understand. If you need a statement, I can sign it. Harley responded with a single line. Be honest. I'll take care of the rest. There was one last piece left where Gary was hiding. Not for persecution, for prevention. A wounded enemy moves like a rat. Through shadows, gutters, holes. Better to seal the access points before the smell stinks up the house. Harley went to the lobby, spoke with Ramirez, and asked for a copy of the night's report. The street camera had caught Gary standing under the tree, his face barely visible. But the license plate of the private driver's car appeared in the distance. The police already had the data, but Harley wanted something else. A map. He returned to his laptop. He opened the public records website. He cross-referenced Gary's old addresses with gym memberships, restaurant reservations, and ride-hailing check-in times. A triangle emerged. A cheap hotel in West Hollywood, a sports bar on Fairfax, a rundown co-working space in a brick building on La Brea, 3 places. 3 taps through which man would try to drink life. Harley sent it to the lawyer. If he sets foot in those addresses and makes any mention of the children, we'll take action. Perfect, she said. And be ready. Some men only understand the end when the last door slams. Then let's close them all. At the end of the day, Matilda was asleep again. Emma and Jack had sent an audio message. Children's voices telling how their grandfather planted a bean seed in a cup. Will it grow tomorrow, Grandpa? It'll take a while, he replied, chuckling to himself, typing, Good things take time, and that's how we know they're good. Good things take time, and that's how we know they're good. As he listened to his daughter's breathing, his cell phone vibrated in his pocket, gently, as if asking permission. He answered without looking at the number, without leaving the shadows of the room. Harley. The voice was different, clean, without the staleness of alcohol, without the arrogance of the stage. It was a tired voice, dangerous because it was human. Gary, Harley didn't speak. He waited. I lost, Gary said, and there was no drama in the sentence, there was weariness. I lost the money, the friends, the reputation, the city. You won, congratulations, silence. The monitor's beep drew an invisible meter between them. I just want to talk to her. Once, Gary continued. No camera, no nothing. Just say sorry. Harley responded slowly, as if supporting a beam and testing the load. Excuses are bricks that don't stick after a fire, he said. And the house you burned down isn't yours to rebuild. On the other side, a short, almost lifeless laugh. You're good with sentences, Gary said. But what about when she asks for me? I will tell the truth. What if one day she forgives me? The pardon is hers, said Harley. The approach is the judge's, silence. The rumble of traffic in the background. Gary didn't hang up. He took a breath, then two. When he spoke again, his voice had the soft weight of someone who's already accepted falling, and so can bite again. You think it's over, he said. But there's still one thing you haven't controlled. Harley stood still. His body had learned decades ago to hear the crack before the beam gave way. I had a safe, Gary continued. In someone else's name, photos, messages, a file on you. Your daughter, the life you protect so much. If I go down for good, it goes up. Harley didn't answer. His hand went into his pocket and instinctively touched Martha's wedding ring. Metal worn by time, eternal through stubbornness. You like projects, don't you? Gary continued. Mine's called Top Floor. When the elevator hits the ground floor, the building implodes. Clap. The call dropped. Harley stood in the darkness, the beeper ticking away the seconds like a stopwatch. Then he turned the page of his notebook. At the top, he wrote, without trembling, Phase 7, unsoldering. Top floor. Safe, probable location. Interlocutor, another person, identify via patterns. Leakage vectors, cloud. Email, media, cut. Countermeasure, injunction. Plus data, mirror, plus forensic audit. He put the notebook away. He ran his hand through Matilda's hair, light newborn, and felt the texture of something returning. Sometimes returning is more work than being born. He left the room. Ramirez stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed. He called, said Harley. Are you going to try anything else? Go, he replied. The last one, Ramirez straightened his posture. How long? Harley looked at the wall clock, then out the window. The sun was already slanting, the city was taking on a brass color. Still today? And what do we do? Harley breathed, feeling the cold air cut into her chest and come out hot, carrying the fear that had no function. What do bridges do when someone tries to blow them up? Ramirez frowned. They were designed not to fall. That's right, said Harley. What if the explosion is too big? We divert the flow. We remove the load, and let the crack happen where nothing hurts. Harley smiled, not with joy, but with recognition. Someone in the world spoke her language. Then let's divert the flow. He returned to the window at the end of the hallway, where a strip of La Brea could be seen like a metallic river. Somewhere in that city, Gary held a safe deposit box key and believed he held the last bit of power. But safe deposit boxes belong to banks. Banks belong to numbers, and numbers belong to laws. The rest is noise. The phone vibrated. Attorney. News flash, she said without further ado. Gary's lawyer asked for a deal. Public apology in exchange for a truce. Declined, said Harley. I already refused. She smiled. Oh, and we got a warrant to seize media and files linked to threats. The judge authorized a search if we identify the safe's custodian. Then make way, Harley said. I'll bring you the location. He hung up. His heart was beating clearly, not fast, not slow, clear. The body knows when the project is at the right point of fusion. It turns into steel. She took 3 steps, stopped, and looked at the door of 712. Inside, the life that mattered. Outside, the man who wanted her to hurt. The difference between them was a line he'd drawn that no one would cross. He took his notebook and pen and wrote the last line of the day. There is no top floor for those who don't have a building. He closed the notebook and, for the first time in a long time, felt that the weight he was carrying wasn't just his. It belonged to the entire structure. Doctors, lawyers, neighbors, security guards, decent journalists, people who, without realizing it, help hold the world together when it's tilting the wrong way. He turned around and went to the safe. Gary activated the top floor. Harley has just hours to locate the safe, shut off the leak, and prevent Matilda's life from being exposed to the world. In the next chapter, the key. The clock in the 7th floor hallway read 6:14 p.m. when Harley left 712. Matilda slept soundly, her skin pink with a low fever but no longer with death. Her new hair spread out on the pillow like newly grown grass. He stopped in the doorway and looked back just for a second. Then, he turned and walked away as if leaving a shelter and entering the grill. In the inside pocket of the coat, the black notebook. At the top of the page, Phase 7, Unsoldering. The mission wasn't just to stop Gary, it was to erase the very possibility of him existing as a threat. But first, I needed to find the key as he left the hospital. Ramirez was waiting for him, arms crossed. His face as hard as freshly cured concrete. Probable locations cross-referenced with the car scene, he said, handing over a tablet. Cheap hotel in West Hollywood, sports bar on Fairfax, co-working space on La Brea. Are you going alone? If he sees me with you, he'll hide, Harley said. I need him to believe I'm alone. That's the only way he'll expose himself. Ramirez didn't like it, but he didn't argue. The trust that is born on the battlefield requires no explanation. Stop. The hotel. The building looked like a carcass of bone. 5 stories of peeling plaster. Sign flashing in worn red Moonlight Inn. The lobby smelled of mold, cigarettes, and abandonment. Harley went straight to the counter, showed the legal consultant badge he had had printed that morning, and the blank warrant the lawyer had prepared. Looking for a guest. Gary McCoy, the receptionist, a boy in his 20s with eyes like he'd seen fights in the hallway, hesitated. He left 2 days ago. He left a box in the storage room. He said someone would come and get it. Take me to her. The warehouse was a raw cement room. The box, made of reinforced cardboard, had the name GM written in thick marker. Harley opened it with the tip of the pocket-knife screwdriver. Within, a crumpled linen suit, an empty leather briefcase, and a business card, Co-work La Brea. Room 214. Harley smiled humorlessly. Gary had left a trail, reverse engineering. Follow the defective component to the breaking point, and stop. The Fairfax Barrett was late afternoon, and the bar was buzzing with neon, the smell of grease and sports shouts. Harley walked in slowly, invisible in the dark suit, eyes scanning the room like a laser. In the background, on a bench, a skinny man was fiddling with an old cell phone. On the screen, a wallpaper with Gary's face smiling. Harley approached. You're Gary's friend. The man blinked in surprise. It depends who asks. Harley placed an envelope on the counter. Inside were screenshots of the defamatory posts, the court report, and a donation receipt for the veteran shelter in the man's name. He said you're hiding something. If you hand it over to me, no one will associate your name with it. If you don't, you'll be listed as an accomplice. The man looked at the envelope as if it were dynamite. Then he muttered, I have nothing. He just sent a message saying that if something happens to him, the safe will open automatically. Automatic how? Do email code word. For a woman. Harley felt the air shift, that quiet click as the final piece appears. Woman's name. Only the first one, Renee. He said she worked with him at La Brea. Third stop, co-work La Breathe. Exposed brick building had tall windows and metal stairs. From the outside, it looked like a startup temple. Inside, a maze of abandoned desks, the smell of stale coffee, and dead ambition. Room 214 was at the end of a narrow corridor. Harley walked in. It was cold, orderly, empty, except for a laptop on the table. Connected login page Renee K. Harley sat down. He typed Gary 123 on instinct. Incorrect password. He opened the notebook. Took a breath and thought as Gary would think. And then he saw it, glued to the monitor's frame. An old yacht sticker typed Marina Del Rey. The screen unlocked, a single folder on the desktop, top floor. It clicked inside dozens of files, old photos of Matilda, expense spreadsheets distorted to look like fraud, edited conversations, even forged emails between Harley and a doctor, suggesting euthanasia, grotesque, but convincing to those who want to believe. At the top, a text file. If I die or go to jail, Renee will send it to the press. Harley copied everything to an encrypted flash drive, then opened the system email. In the outbox, you found, schedule automatic sending if you don't receive a login. From Gary within 48 hours, clock in the corner of the screen. 14 hours remained. Harley opened the computer's calendar. Renee would have a night shift. Confirmed. Check in at 7:30 p.m., room 214. He looked at his wristwatch. 6 p.m. He hid the flash drive in the lining of his coat. He closed the laptop and waited. At 7:32 p.m., heeled footsteps in the hallway. A thin woman, perfect bun, thin-rimmed glasses. He entered the room and stopped when he saw him. You are her father. Harley didn't ask how he knew. He just said, I need the key. Renee put down her bag, looked at him with scalpel-like calm. Gary paid me to keep the system active in case something happened to it. If I don't submit, I lose my payment. If you send it, it will destroy 3 innocent lives. She didn't blink. And if I don't send it, he'll come after me when he leaves. Harley took the flash drive out of his pocket and placed it on the table. This is the mirror. It's already been filed in court with my lawyer. If the images are released, they will be traced back to this IP address, and you will be named as an accomplice to defamation and extortion. Renee stood still, her eyes fixed on the flash drive as if it were poison. Then he sighed, a sound like a bridge giving way. What's the code word? Harley asked. For canceling? She hesitated for a long second. Then she said, to give up. Harley typed in the automation field. The progress bar ran. Automation canceled. Content archived. He exhaled for the first time since Gary's call. You're safe now, he said, putting away the flash drive. And so is my daughter. Renee didn't answer. She just nodded, pale, and left. Outside the building, Harley stopped on the sidewalk. The Los Angeles sky was the color of lead and gasoline. He took out his cell phone and called the lawyer. Contents seized, he said. I'll send the encrypted mirror within the hour. Excellent. As soon as you arrive, we'll request a warrant to search the physical safe. Harley hung up and stood there for a moment, listening to the city breathe like a tired machine. He felt the world for an instant, level out beneath his feet. Then the phone vibrated. Unknown number, he answered. You found it, said Gary's voice, low, clear, without a tremor. I knew you would. You're predictable. Harley was silent. Now all that's left is the physical safe, Gary continued. And here comes the fun part. It's in a place where you'll have to choose between saving her or saving yourself. The sound of waves in the background. Mardot Gary was back in the water. If you try to stop me, he said, the safe opens. If you let me go, I'll disappear, and you can live in peace. Harley responded like someone measuring a bridge before crossing it. Peace is not made with threats, Gary. Peace is made with absence. Gary laughed, short, humorless. Then come. Bring your ruler, your diagrams, your engineer's justice. Bring everything. Because when you arrive, 'twill have already begun. Clack. The call dropped. Harley stood on the sidewalk, the wind from the avenue whirling the advertising papers at his feet, and thought of Martha in the old kitchen. saying that well-made bridges fear no storms. Then he opened his notebook and wrote the last line of the night. Phase 8, demolition. Locate and neutralize the vault. He put away the notebook and walked towards the sound of the sea. Gary is on the coast with the physical safe. Harley has hours to stop him from opening it. Or you will lose the life you fought to save. Or you will lose the life you fought to save. Demolition. The road to the sea seemed a razor's edge under the indigo sky. Harley drove in silence, the sedan's engine vibrating softly like a restrained heart. The Pacific Coast Highway opened before him, white stripes streaking the asphalt like blueprints. To the left, the Pacific breathed deeply, beating against ancient rocks with the patience of one who knows time will prevail. To the right, dunes, warehouses, marinas, a forest of lines that rose and fell in the wind. In the inside pocket of the coat, the black notebook, Phase 8, demolition. In the entire body, a single verb, finish. He parked 2 blocks from the marina under the sharp shade of a coconut tree. He watched the activity from afar. Small boats bobbing, early morning voices, a radio playing something old. The salty smell brought Martha back for a second. The 2 of them sitting on a Texas dock, her laughing as the wind ripped grains of sugar from the donut and threw them into the sea. The memory passed like light on water. Harley got out of the car. The cold air hit his face and felt just right, like steel that takes shape as it cools. As he walked, his cell phone rang. A message from the lawyer, search warrant in hand, and another from Ramirez, 2 discreet vehicles on the way. Without siren, he responded with a curt, "Okay." This was a controlled demolition, every charge in place, every timer synchronized, every escape route planned. Gary wanted spectacle. Harley would do the engineering. The marina slept with one eye half open. The gate guard lifted his chin, recognizing Harley from no photo, but from a certain kind of determination. He didn't ask for a name. He simply pointed a finger at the plank line leading to Pier D. Harley walked slowly. He had learned not to hurry when a fall was certain. Haste makes you stumble. The pier groaned under his weight, old wood groaning, screws adjusting. At the end, a dark-hulled speedboat rocked gently. Sitting on the stern bench, a hooded man watched the horizon as if he could pierce it with his eyes. Gary. The first thing Harley noticed was his stillness. There was no swishing of arrogance, no trembling of someone who'd had too much to drink. It was the stillness of someone who had given up on appearing human and decided to become pure intention. "You got here fast, engineer," Gary said without turning around. His voice was clear, the sea breaking the S between the words. "I know the shortcuts," Harley replied, stopping 2 steps from the boat without climbing in. The wind tugged at his coat. He let it. "Where's the safe?" Gary patted the seat cushion with the backs of his fingers as if petting an invisible dog. "Below you. In the basement, anchored to the deck, 2-stage code, mechanical and digital, and the key. Here." He lifted a cord from under his coat. A small metal capsule hung there, jingling softly. "The rest will arrive via SMS when I send a word. A word you love, by the way." And a seagull cut through the sky, screeching a thin cry that spread over the waves. Harley assessed the angles. Distance to Gary, height of the guardrail, depth of the bilge well. He also assessed the likely arrival time of the patrol cars, 5 to 7 minutes, and the acceptable margin of error, 0. "Are you going to give orders, or are you going to bluff your way to the bottom?" he asked. Gary smiled with half his mouth still looking at the horizon. "You've already won, Harley. You cut my cards, my clubs, my mirrors. You protected the princess, you built the walls. But there's always an old pipe running beneath the newer foundation. Mine's called the top floor. It opens when the building is finished." "There's no building, Gary," Harley said calmly. "Just rubble." Gary finally turned. His eyes shone with that feverish light that sometimes runs in blades. "Are you going to go up, or would you rather watch from below when I type?" Harley didn't move. "You've already typed it, at least in your head. But the key isn't yours. It belongs to the one holding what's left of you." Fear. For a moment, something flickered in Gary's pupil, a reflection of himself in a cracking glass. He took a deep breath, held the capsule between his fingers, and said almost gently, "Do you know why you hate me so much, Harley? Because I show you who you could have been if you weren't afraid to choose yourself. I chose myself. You chose the world. and the world sucked you dry until you became this old man in a coat on an empty pier, defending a daughter who hid her illness from you out of pity. Harley smiled, not a sneer, but the short laugh of someone who recognizes a well-written farce. You didn't choose yourself, Gary. You ran away from everything that asked you to be true and found mirrors. A man isn't the parties he attends. He's the silence he endures. Gary tilted his head as if being lectured. Beautiful. It almost moved me. But I'd rather hear the bip to SMS. Sob. Harley stepped forward and climbed onto the boat. The hull creaked. The smell of fuel and salt hit him. He measured the deck like a board. Width grips where the foot slips, where the body locks. And now, he said, already 2 meters away. Now you watch, Gary replied, lifting the string. Because you're good at this. Watching, suffering, and then fixing the pieces. I'm good at the before. The cell phone vibrated in Harley's pocket. Message, he didn't look. He knew it was the lawyer. On her way, wait. Instead, he reached into his coat, slowly pulled out the notebook, and placed it on the stern bench. Do you want to know how it ends? He asked. Surprise me, Gary said, holding up the capsule like an offering to a Byzantine god. Harley opened the notebook to a blank page. He wrote 3 words in a firm hand. He turned and showed no testimony, no power. Gary frowned impatiently. So what? So you're an audience man, Gary. Without an audience, you're just wet noise. Harley pointed with his chin behind him, where 2 figures stood discreetly on the opposite pier. Ramirez and a police officer. No one here is filming. No one here will publish you. You can't exist without it. Gary's jaw clenched. He pulled out the capsule, brought it to his lips like a trophy, and then opened it with a sharp twist. A tiny chip fell into his palm. Then I will exist in the noise of the safe, he whispered. That is enough. He moved into the hold. Harley followed 2 steps behind, mindful of the other's weight on the hatch. Gary pulled the ring, and the hatch opened a square of shadow where the sea lapped gently against the keel. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, half enchanted by his own tragedy. All dark and deep. The ideal place for secrets, and for old men who can't swim. He took the first step down, then the second, and reached for the side panel. Buttons, an old-fashioned keypad, and a curved lead steel cylinder. The safe. The blue light on the keyboard came on when the chip touched the base. Ready to die, Harley. He smiled toothily. Metaphorically, of course. You're a man of metaphors. Harley didn't answer. Instead, he moved enough for the morning light, coming from just the right angle to catch the steel of the safe and bounce back. In the reflection, he saw himself, and the makeshift weapon wedged beneath the sideboard. Ashok Stinger bought at any store. It wasn't for defense. It was for show. You were going to knock me down, film it, and pretend I fell, Harley said, almost with museum-like curiosity. Gary blinked. I adapt. Of course it fits. Harley nodded. Parasites always adapt. Below, the keyboard flashed asking numeric code. Gary punched in 4 numbers. The green light came on halfway. 4 more to go. Last chance, engineer. Let me go, I disappear. The capsule disappears. The vault sleeps. We all live. Peace is not negotiated with those who threaten, Harley replied without anger. Either it is or it isn't. Gary took a deep breath. Then goodbye. He lowered his thumb for the second sequence. That's when the first snap had happened. It wasn't metal. It was voice. Gary McCoy. The word came through the hatch like a cold wind. Judicial police stop and climb up immediately with your hands visible. Gary froze, his finger hovering millimeters from the button. His eyes darted furiously toward the voice. Ramirez had appeared at the edge of the pier, his badge briefly flashing silver. Behind him, the officer, gun low, posture firm. There was no siren. There was no audience. Only reality. You're always late, Gary growled. The future has already begun. He rotated his shoulder to dip his finger into the keyboard. Harley moved. It wasn't a cinematic coup. It was an adjustment. A half step left. A twist of the torso. The forearm pressing Gary's bicep in a leverage point that any locksmith would recognize. The body gave way reflexively. The finger didn't touch the button. It scraped sideways. The light flickered yellow, error. Gary let out a short cry, a mixture of pain and surprise. He tried to fight back with the stinger, Harley grabbed his wrist and slammed it into the hatch's edge with just the right amount of force. The stinger fell into the hold and cracked in the void like trapped thunder. The smell of ozone wafted up. Now, Ramirez stepped forward. Gary, in a panic, did what trapped men do. He grabbed the cord, brought the capsule back to his mouth, and bit down like a dog. The chip slipped from his teeth, hit the edge, bounced, and fell into the basement, disappearing into the shadows. The silence that followed was so heavy that even the seagulls seemed to hold their breath. Gary stared into the darkness, and for the first time in history, the terror wasn't theatrical. It was pure. "No," he whispered, and the whisper broke like a thin shell. Harley lifted him by the scruff of his neck and the straps of his coat and gently pushed him back against the seat. Ramirez arrived with him, armbands in hand. The officer read him, for the 100th time in his career, rights that rarely sound like justice. There they did. Gary McCoy, you are under arrest for violation of a court order, attempted trespassing, and coercion with aggravated charges. Gary didn't hear. His gaze remained fixed on the black hole in the basement, where his top floor sank like lead without poetry. Harley took 2 steps, and with a slow gesture, closed the hatch. The clack the lock sounded as if someone had finished a story in pencil, and then gone over it with a pen. On the pier, dawn was fading. Ramirez led Gary under a brown blanket of breeze and salt. The man moved as if he no longer recognized his own weight. Too light, too heavy, out of proportion. "Does he still have copies?" Ramirez asked quietly as they walked. "Not his," Harley said. "Ours are already filed. Even if something drips, it drips on hot stone. What about the physical safe? It goes to the judge. With seal. With expert opinion. Instead of a spectacle. We'll have minutes." Ramirez nodded. "I never thought I would hear someone say "Ata" with such satisfaction. Those who have lived on bridges learn to love paper," Harley replied. And something in the sentence made them laugh briefly. Like relief that doesn't want to turn into joy out of respect for what it cost. The patrol cars departed without sirens, discreetly cutting through the wind like knives. Harley stood on the pier alone for a minute. He picked up his cell phone. There were 2 messages from the lawyer. "I got the warrant to seize the safe. Bring it straight away. And Dr. Rivera, Matilda asked for you. Vitals stable. We had a good day." He responded first to the doctor. "Tell her I'm taking the noise away," then to the lawyer. "On my way." He put away his cell phone. He fingered Martha's wedding ring inside his coat. Soft metal, worn edge, a vivid memory. He looked out to sea. The Pacific continued to breathe unhurriedly. The completed demolition wasn't the ocean swallowing a city. It was a man learning that no one needs to fall into the hole with the enemy to win. Harley got back into the car. He drove in silence. The city dawned in porcelain and steel, like a perfect model destined to shatter at any corner. He knew the breaking points. He also knew the reinforcement points. At Cedars Sinai, the elevator returned him to the 7th floor with the solemnity of a spaceship. When the door opened, the hallway no longer felt like a tube. It felt like a corridor. People were talking softly. There were modest laughs in a neighboring room, and a nurse was arranging a few flowers in a discreet vase. Harley pulled up to the gas station. Ramirez had already notified security. Completed. The record flashed on a monitor. McCoy, custody. The world isn't perfect, Harley thought, but sometimes he writes right. In 712, Matilda was awake. Her thin face had a new, almost mischievous color. Her clear eyes had that light that appears when pain diminishes their volume by a point or two. "You're gone," she said, her voice scratchy with sleep. "I went looking for silence," he replied. She smiled small, and that smile ran through him like a river making its way through the mud after a drought. "And did you find it?" he asked. Harley nodded. "And I brought it to you." He pulled out the chair, sat down, and took her hand. The monitor beeped softly without distress. The air smelled of the hospital, yes, but also of the 4th Sunday at home after cleaning. "Father." Matilda adjusted her head on the pillow, looking at him with a tenderness that wasn't the painful one of days gone by. It was that of now. "You saved me." He shook his head slowly. "You saved yourself. I just knocked down the things that were blocking your way out. You know how to knock things over with elegance," she teased. and they both chuckled softly. "Do you know what comes after the demolition?" he asked. "Dust?" she ventured, joking. "Project," he said. "We design again. With space to breathe. With doors for light. Without walls we bump into in the middle of the night." Matilda took a deep breath as if testing a new lung. "I want this. Me too," he said. "And you know what the best part is?" She stared at him. "It's going to be hard work," he concluded, smiling. "Because good things take time. And that's how we know they're good," she laughed, a sound like thin metal that didn't hurt. The beep followed. Harley rested his head against the back of the chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He saw Martha on the Texas porch waving a hand and saying, "Okay, engineer, okay," like someone finally coming to terms with what he's always been. A man who understands that love is calculation and courage. It's cargo forecasting and, above all, presence. The door opened a finger to admit Dr. Rivera, who smiled with his eyes and gave a discreet, "How are you?" sign. Harley nodded. The doctor approached, checked the numbers, signed something on the clipboard, and left as he had entered. Light, efficient. Without stealing the spotlight, the room was theirs again. Two pairs of hands intertwined. A story that no longer needed a cliffhanger. Harley breathed. The air went in cold, came out lukewarm. His internal structure, cracked for years, sounded like a beam finding support. There was no sound effect to emphasize, just the continuous sound, and then suddenly, beautiful dew monitor, bip, beep, beep. "Father," Matilda said, closing her eyes. "Will you stay?" "Always," he replied, and it stayed. Outside, the day broke wide. The sea patients and masks resumed their ancient choreography. In some police warehouse, a sealed safe waited, destined for paperwork, not people. In another room, a man signed documents with hands that never trembled with care, only with loss. At 7:12, a future began, not with fanfare, but with the almost invisible sound of a well-done demolition. The silence. After all, where do new walls, new windows, new laughter fit in? Where do Emma and Jack fit in running around the Texas backyard, their hands dirty with dirt, shouting that the beans finally sprouted? Harley gave her daughter's hand a light squeeze. She squeezed back. It was enough. End. Conclusion. And so. The silence returned, not the heavy silence of absence, but the light silence of someone who is finally at peace. Matilda could start over, and Harley could finally breathe. They defeated not just one man, but the darkness he brought. If this story touched you, get ready. There are many others that will touch your heart even more. Real, intense stories that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. All in one place. Get the PDF compilation of dozens of moving stories now. The link is in the pinned comments. Don't miss the chance to experience each one of them, because some stories just can't be forgotten. Just can't be forgotten.